Good morning. I'm the Reverend Dr. Stephanie May of First Parish in Wayland. Welcome to commemoration at the historic North Cemetery in Wayland, Massachusetts. We are here beside the grave of Lydia Maria Child, our distinguished resident of Wayland. We're here to remember that the death of suffrage for women in 1920, a fight that began with courageous women such as Lydia Maria Child speaking out for women's equality. From the 1848 Women's Convention in Seneca Falls, New York, to the first National Women's Convention just 30 miles away in Worcester in 1850, to the many speeches given, tracts written, leaflets distributed, bills presented to legislatures, and conversations held. It was a fight to win suffrage. In 1879, the Massachusetts legislature granted women the right to vote for school committees. In 1893, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin founds the New England Club for Black women in Boston. When the club begins to publish a newsletter in 1895, it is the first newspaper or magazine published by and for Black women. Resistance to the pro-suffrage efforts was real. In 1895, the Women's Anti-Suffrage Association of Massachusetts was founded, one of the strongest anti-suffrage efforts in the nation. Perhaps unsurprisingly then, in 1915, a referendum to support an amendment for women's suffrage was defeated in Massachusetts. And Jane has this lovely bluebird pin on that you'll see later when she speaks that or people would wear to promote a positive passage, even though it defeated, it had a great pin. It did have a great pin. Congress passed in 1919, which Massachusetts ratified on June 25, 1919. After the state ratified, the U.S. Secretary of State certified the ratifications, and the 19th Amendment became law 100 years ago today on August 26, 1920. In total, the 19th Amendment simply read, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation." While the 19th Amendment granted many white women access to the vote, many Black women remained disenfranchised by racism until the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1965. So also Indigenous women, some of the descendants of the tribes who once lived on this land of which we now stand, would fight decades more to win suffrage state by state. And so we stand here today in this sacred place of memorial to remember the generations of women and men who held a vision of political equality and of suffrage for women. One of those who believed in equality and suffrage for both men and for both women and African Americans was Lydia Maria Child. I turn it over to Jane Siakia, a Wayland independent historian, to tell us more.
It has been my pleasure to be here a number of times paying tribute to Lydia Maria Child. And I also want to make note of the efforts that Stephanie has made to keep her memory alive at the First Parish Church, and to Ken Sawyer, who I know was here on her 100th anniversary of her death, and who has generously donated his papers on Lydia Maria Child to the Wayland Museum and Historical Society. So thank you to both of you, and thank you all for coming here. So Lydia Maria Child was born in 1802, so that puts her very, very early in the spectrum of women's rights. And really, what she wanted above all were human rights. But of course, she had some very special feelings about women. So I'm going to quote her and say that for 40 years, this is in 1870, 10 years before her death, for 40 years I have keenly felt the cramping effects of my limitations as a woman, and I have submitted to them under a perpetual and indignant protest. It is too late for the subject to be of much interest to me personally. I have walked in fetters thus far, and my pilgrimage is drawing to a close. But I see so clearly that domestic life and public life would both be greatly ennobled by the perfect equality and companionship of men and women in every department of life, that I long to have an accomplished fact for the order and well-being of the world. And I also should make mention, I'll read you some more quotes because who can say it better than Maria herself, that she is now in the National Women's Hall of Fame in Seneca Falls, and I think I can very safely say she is the only Wayland woman who has been so honored. And so her renown, she is also a member inducted into the Abolition Hall of Fame in Peterborough, New York, at the home of Garrett Smith. And this was actually when I gave a talk there many years ago, while we were transitioning from slides to PowerPoints. I just brought her so she could keep me company while I was speaking. But anyway, she has been recognized. The last person I brought here was a young woman, a college student from Bologna, Italy, who was studying Margaret Fuller and Lydia Maria Child. She had all her letters, and she was just delighted. She came out here in the train. I picked her up, and we spent a lovely morning seeing the sites that were of significance to Lydia Maria Child. So that was a very special morning for me. So I'm going to read another quote of hers. This is only months before she died, and to my mind, no principle is more obviously and entirely true than that which claims for every individual the right to have a voice in the laws by which they are governed. If he or she is not fit to have a voice in the government, it is because they have wrongfully been kept in subservience, and the sooner the wrong is remedied, the better for individuals and for society. And again, in 1867, it is the theory of our government that the people govern. Women constitute half the people. It has been legally decided that they are citizens, and as citizens, constituting so large a portion of the people, I think they plainly have a right to vote. I believe it would be good for them to exercise the right, because all human souls grow stronger in proportion to the increase of their responsibilities and the high employment of their faculties. But she herself was a pioneer in women's rights, leading by example as part of the abolition movement. She was one of the people who really laid her writing career on the line when she published a book about African Americans, an appeal on behalf of the Americans called Africans. And this was in 1833, giving up all her success that she had had with novels and with her advice books for women like The Frugal Housewife. So she herself led by example. More than anything, she was the first woman to become the editor of a newspaper that was dedicated to public policy. She wrote a book about women in the 1830s on equality for women. Her whole life, although I think slavery was her passion, her whole life just demonstrated that she meant all people should have rights, and that women certainly, she could tell by her own experiences that she was, as I say, leading by example at a time before well before Seneca Falls, that she was standing up for the rights of women. I want to read, this is my favorite quote of Lydia Maria Child's. My husband always starts to cry when I read the last line, so, and he is here, so I want to make note that in 1859, when John Brown was arrested at Harper's Ferry, that Lydia Maria Child was sort of awakened from living in this little drowsy village, Wayland, and that she became very engrossed in the trials and tribulations of John Brown, offered to go down and take care of him, but she also was back in the spotlight and became a best-selling author again in 1859 from correspondence between herself and two of Brown's most ardent critics and pro-slavery advocates, Governor Henry Wise of Virginia and Brown's captor, and Mrs. Margaretta Mason, wife of Virginia Senator James Mason. The correspondence was circulated in newspapers, fueling the flames between pro- and anti-slavery camps. Gathered in pamphlet form by the American Anti-Slavery Society, an amazing 300,000 copies were distributed throughout the free states. I will read one more small excerpt in which Child used the slave owners' own words to refute what they referred to as the benevolent institution of slavery. And here is her reply to Mrs. Mason. To the personal questions you ask me, I will reply in the name of all the women of New England. It would be extremely difficult to find any woman in our villages who does not sew for the poor and watch with the sick whenever occasion requires. We pay our domestics generous wages with which they can purchase as many Christmas gowns as they please, a process far better for their characters as well as our own, than to receive their clothing as a charity after being deprived of just payment for their labor. I have never known an instance where the pangs of maternity did not meet with requisite assistance, and here in the North, after we have helped mothers, we do not sell the babies. And I think that is, yeah, that always just gives me a chill when I say that, but so clearly defining what is wrong with slavery and what is wrong with, I think, women who espouse that cause. So I don't know, do you want me to continue or do you want to?
Why don't you make sure and include the one quote about the wrapping?
Okay, because I didn't write that down because that's down in the...
I've got it written down.
Okay, read it. It doesn't have to all be me saying it because I thought that was coming...
I have it somewhere for later, I think.
Right, I have it too.
Okay. So, before Lydia died, one of her, she wrote in a letter
I have lived too long and observed too much to be disturbed by the world's mockery. Women's stock is rising in the market. I shall not live to see women vote, but I'll come and rap on the ballot box.
So I also would like to, in 1866, she wrote a letter to Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who I think is one of the two names that people associate with suffrage, although the story is much more complex. And but those who write the history, I guess, celebrate themselves, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. But she wrote to Stanton in 1866, "I will tell you frankly that I sympathize entirely with your views concerning women's true position in society, and I cordially wish you Godspeed. I believe it to be right just that women should vote, for many of them are taxed to support the government, and taxation without representation is contrary to the principles on which our republic was founded. Women are imprisoned and hung by the laws, and therefore they have a right to a voice in making the laws. As for our capacity to vote as intelligently as the mass of men, that is a point I could scarcely condescend to argue." So to me, her cause is humanity, and in that covers all the things that African Americans should have and that women should have. And so indeed a great lady who really suffered a lot of adversity, losing her income, losing a lot of her friends and a lot of the organizations that had welcomed her when she was a woman scribbler. She does make the remark at some point that, and I don't have a date, "I was gravely warned by some of my female acquaintances that no woman could expect to be regarded as a lady after she had written a book." So this did not deter her, and indeed she wrote for all of her life. And to me, nobody deserves more credit. She hid her light under a bushel. She did not want notoriety. She was not a public speaker. She was a writer. And she did not, even at her funeral, she had requested no flowers. Which I find ironic, but that's all right, it's not her funeral. So I think that's a lovely tribute to Maria. But she wanted a very, very simple funeral, and she had Wendell Phillips, who the noted abolitionist who spoke, other friends of hers like William Lloyd Garrison had passed on, but she did have Wendell Phillips there. And yes, and I think of her saying, "I don't want any flowers," but as I say, it's not her funeral. So, so I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments. I think she doesn't get the acknowledgement in Wayland that I would hope, but I know that people like Ken and Stephanie have certainly done their bit to give her fame and recognition, and personally I appreciate that very much. I'll tell you a personal story that I did not even know that she lived here for a number of years myself, because there was so little said about her. There's no streets named after her. There's no buildings named after her. And one time I was working at Louisa May Alcott's Orchard House in the 1980s, and I read this beautiful description of Orchard House by a woman named Lydia Maria Child, and she wrote it from Wayland. And I said, I got to get to know this woman, and that is what I did. And so that started me. But I had to hear about her or read about her in Concord. That was how little I know her pictures at the library, but she should have, in my opinion, much more recognition than she has. I think, Mary, you are, yes? Mary, I think you're reading something.
I thought that was later. No, you come after her.
In the vault in the town building,
Mary, the microphone.
in the vault in the town building, there are books with signatures of people who have registered to vote over the years, usually in a lovely flowing script. Kay Westcott Gardner worked with the town clerk, Anna Ludwig, to transcribe all of the names. You can find them on the Wayland Historical Society's website. Between August 23rd and October 23rd, 1920, 220 women registered to vote in Wayland. 48 of them on August 26th, 100 years ago today. The women ranged in age from 21 to 81 and were born in 13 different states and 5 countries: Canada, England, Ireland, Spain, and Sweden. And one was listed as being born in South America. 10 of the Canadians were born in Nova Scotia, and 7 women came from Ireland. Most listed their occupations as homemaker, although there were also teachers, a nurse, stenographers and typists, shoemakers, a telephone operator, a colorant, and a decorator, and an actress, Beatrice Herford, who built Volks Theater. Other names are familiar to us because they are street names we recognize, including Bent, Bogren, Parmenter, Keith, Corman, Damon, Draper, Glover, Sears, and Loker. So.
I want to thank you again for being here today, and I want to thank the organizing team, Jane Siakia and Mary Antes and Kay Westcott Gardner and Alex Jensen, helping us on tech, as well as thanks also to Courtney Michael of the Wayland Library for sharing some of her display information. She had a lovely display about the 100th anniversary that you can't see, but it was in the library. And also to Anna Ludwig, who Mary mentioned, the Wayland Town Clerk, who did extensive research on the names of the women who voted. On the stand here is the biography of Lydia Maria Child that's listed on the Women's Hall of Fame in Seneca. I took that biography and put it on here, and then also the list of the women who registered to vote in 1880 when the state allowed women to register to vote for school committee. There were 10 women in Wayland. Those names are listed there, and also the 223, I think it is, of the women who registered to vote in 1920. So we have their names here for you to take a look at. As we end our time together here at the cemetery, I invite each of you to lay a flower at Mariah's grave. We know she liked flowers.
A lot of gardening, but she couldn't do it ever.
Yeah. So may these flowers be of gratitude and for all those who fought for suffrage for women and for Black Americans. Perhaps may they also be a promise that we continue to fight against disenfranchisement in the next election and in the years to come. Please, we have extra flowers here if you didn't bring one, and please lay a flower. Thank you.